So quickly, I think there's a lot of interest in artificial intelligence in India and across the world. Some of us joke that everything has become artificial intelligence in the last 1 year. And it's good to see all of you people who are also again here interested in artificial intelligence. Just to get an idea of the audience, if I can get a quick show of hands, how many of you are here from engineering or computer science? Ooh. So there's a completely computer science audience. So you might already know everything I'll talk about here. Anyone from arts, humanity out here? Oh, we have a lady there. Anyone else from arts and humanity? No, okay. Anyone from business, entrepreneur, school kids? Okay, here we have a bunch of school kids. So, okay, good. So there's a lot of fascination about artificial intelligence, and there's this one term where there's extreme amount of fascination, which is deep learning. Right? So how many of you have heard about the term deep learning? Okay, excellent. So let's start there. So my first two questions to the audience is that, tell me what is artificial intelligence and what is deep learning? So raise your hands and pick people, and please be brief, but I have a gentleman here. There's a mic there, right there. Yeah.
So the term artificial intelligence has actually got hyped to a great extent. It's all under analytics and machine learning. My opinion is that artificial intelligence is just reinforcement learning. When we don't know what the outcome is going to be, and you trial and error, and then we try to reach a reward.
Okay.
Everywhere else, you are optimizing a function, like in a loss function or something, and you're optimizing parameters.
Got it. What is deep learning? Do you know?
Deep learning is you have a huge set of deep neural network, and you are training that for classification, regression tasks.
Okay, neural network. So you're saying analytics, reinforcement learning, trial and error. That's what I heard. Anyone here? What is artificial intelligence? What is deep learning? Okay, this gentleman right here wants to. And it will be good if there are some kids or school kids who have an idea of what artificial intelligence is. It will probably be more imaginative.
So the basic difference between AI and deep learning is where AI, you have got certain parameters and rules already predefined, or you let the machine decide for it. However, in deep learning, there is no rules because the machine itself defines the rules. It has got certain inputs, and then it is generating the output, and then basis of that it also generates the rules for itself.
Got it. So AI is rule-based systems where we feed in the rules, and deep learning is figuring out the rules itself. Any other thoughts on what is AI and what is this deep learning? These two terms which everyone is fascinated about. I love to hear from a woman, and any view. You don't need to be a computer scientist, but what is your understanding of this word AI? Why does it fascinate you? Anyone from here, this side, wants to speak? What is their understanding of AI? I'll only move if I get one more understanding of AI, and then I'll get into the presentation. Anyway, anyone wants to give it a shot? What does AI mean to them? Mean to you? Okay, there's a gentleman here.
So, AI is a very old concept, right? Since 1958, we have been experimenting in AI. The current understanding of AI is, in my perspective, very limited because they have seen a very limited use of AI, right? If you really look back at AI, then AI would be something very similar to what Asimov has described with his three laws of robotics. It's trying to imitate what human intelligence is. Not necessarily using rules, right? Not necessarily using deep learning, not necessarily what the gentleman there described being analytics. It is building intelligence in a sense which is artificial, rather than a bionic or a biological intelligence.
Sure.
That's how I define AI.
Yeah.
And within AI, there are various I would say branches. So machine learning, deep learning, all of these would be branches within the bigger umbrella of AI. I think he defined deep learning very well, which is various layers of neural net with weightages at each layer defining the ultimate output.
Sure. Sir, can you introduce yourself as well?
So I'm Chandra Mauli.
Okay. So he's pretty much covered my first slide. So let's figure out what is AI and what is this deep learning which everyone is crazy about. And I'll give you a quick tour of the history of AI, right? So when did the term AI came? As the gentleman pointed out, it came in 1950s. And there was this famous workshop at Dartmouth where there were these three people, John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, and Simon Herbert, if I'm not missing anyone, who first coined the term AI and set the vision for the next 50 to 100 years of what AI is. And AI, primarily, I think the first person who used that term was John McCarthy, who was at that time a professor at MIT, and then later moved to Stanford. But very simply, what John McCarthy said is AI is he wanted to build machines which can mimic human intelligence. Right? So what humans do, he wanted to make machines which can have the intelligence which humans have, right? And it's a very, very broad definition. But remember at the same time, when he defined this term artificial intelligence broadly, there's another field which was there at MIT which was called cybernetics. And cybernetics is what the gentleman here was talking about. It is all about looking at data patterns, and analytics. And what McCarthy said is that I am not doing cybernetics. I'm doing something different. That's why I'm calling it AI. So the irony of today's time is that what the techniques which we call as AI, most of them McCarthy wanted to differentiate himself from. So for McCarthy, AI was not analytics, right? So that's how the term first came, and the definition is extremely broad, as I just said, that mimicking human intelligence. What happened after that? So now let's look at techniques, right? So deep learning is one technique of machine learning, and machine learning is one technique of artificial intelligence. So the first neural network came as early as someone was telling me 1943, but the first time someone showed that neural network can do some classification was around the 1950s and 60s, right? So there's the famous single neuron algorithm which is called the perceptron algorithm, which came. And it showed that it can, do some classification. That is that if you, what is classification? It is like if you give a set of images to a machine, it can say whether there's a dog in that image or not, right? That's the basic definition of classification, right? Classify. If you have a bundle of images, classify them in two categories. So interestingly, there was this algorithm perceptron which could do some classification tasks. And that was the first neural network which people showed could do something. But then this professor I earlier talked about, his name is Marvin Minsky, he wrote a whole book which showed that these perceptrons can't do much. For the scientists here, what he wrote a whole book on was that perceptron can only do linear classification, right? And that kind of killed the field of neural networks for the next 20 to 30 years. People did not invest their time in neural networks. What happened again in the 1990s, we again went back to the neural networks. And why I'm after neural networks is deep learning is all about neural networks, right? So when you hear this whole slide, you know the message I'm trying to give here. But what was shown in neural networks is that you can do this multi-layered neural networks, and then it can solve hard problems. And for AI, what are hard problems can be very, very simple for humans. Bear that in mind, right? So the problem it solved in the 1990s, neural network, was a handwriting recognition problem, right? Digit recognition. If someone has written a 1, the machine can say it is a 1. And people were really happy. Artificial intelligence scientists were really, really happy. Oh, we can do digit recognition using neural networks, right? But unfortunately, around the same time, there was another technique which came, which was support vector machines, right? And support vector machines again killed neural networks. Why did it kill neural networks? Because SVMs are theoretically elegant. We know why SVMs work and why they can do what they can. We don't understand why neural networks work. So neural networks work, they can solve hard problems, but we don't know why they work, right? So for another 20 to 30 years, neural network was a field which was killed because it worked as well as SVMs did in solving problems, but SVMs were more theoretically elegant. We understood why SVMs worked. So why are we back to neural networks? And this happened in 2012 when this guy, whose name is Geoffrey Hinton, who's at University of Toronto, who's considered by many as the father of deep learning, showed that he could do a multi-layer neural network and solve very, very hard problems using it, which SVMs can't solve. So this is the third comeback of neural networks, and in this avatar we are calling it deep learning, right? Because it's a multi-layered neural network, and we have figured out how to train it. And the problem which it famously solved was the computer vision problem. So I don't know if you guys know, but till 2012, it was very, very hard for machines to, if you take a photograph of this place, to say that, oh, here there's a chair, here there's a person sitting, here there's a fan. Machines just couldn't do this. As recently as 2012, and suddenly we saw that deep neural networks could do that, right? And that's why we are again back to deep learning, and we have all these people who are interested across the world in deep learning. But remember, deep learning and all the problems which we are today solving using AI are very narrow problems, where we give a very, very specific task to the machine. And then these algorithms can work and deliver that thing. As soon as you give them a broad, open-ended task, they fail. So a lot of people call it narrow AI. We are doing narrow AI, and deep learning can do narrow AI very, very well. But if you look at what McCarthy wanted, that big vision that machines mimic humans, we are still clueless, by the way. We know that whatever we know of deep learning today doesn't solve that, and we would be needing more disruptions to solve that. Another point which I'd like to make here is that a lot of you would think, and I should have asked, by the way, this question before I revealed what I revealed, is that all the artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning is being built by companies. I ran a survey asking people who's invented deep learning. One of the choices was Google, and everyone picked Google, right? A lot of the work, in fact, most of the research which happens in artificial intelligence, or in, for matter, any field, happens at universities, right? And it's the research universities which, are creating these disruptions, which then companies adopt and scale them at a very, very large scale. So innovation has very deep roots in scientists and researchers who sit at universities. Moving ahead, so very quickly summarizing what I said, there's AI, machine learning is one set of what AI is, and then there's deep learning is one set of what machine learning is. There are many different techniques in AI. There's reinforcement learning, there's rule-based and expert systems, which people did for many, many years. There's symbolic reasoning. There's things to do with robotics, which is called embodied intelligence. Machine learning is what is giving us a lot of benefit today. It might get disrupted, and there might be something else tomorrow, right? So the message I'm wanting to give to you guys is, if you were chasing deep learning, till 5 to 7 years back, no one cared for deep learning. And maybe 5 years later, no one will care for deep learning again, because there might be some other disruption. So if you guys are really interested to be knowledge creators in AI, please move beyond deep learning. There are a lot of other things in AI, and we know that for a lot of problems, there are these other things which are very, very useful. And within machine learning, also there are a lot of different techniques. If I want an interpretable model, where I can understand what the machine is doing, how is it coming to the... So let me explain this very simply, that today I know that if I give an image to a machine, it can tell me that it's a dog. But I don't know how the machine is figuring out. If I ask you, why do you know this image is a dog? You will say, oh, I see these kind of ears, I see this kind of nose, it is on 4 feet, that's why I know it's a dog. But we don't know why the machine thinks it's a dog. And for those who are interested, they can see some of the papers which have come out of MIT where it shows it's very easy to trick the machine by making them believe that a fan is a dog, right? So we really don't know when you're using deep learning, that why the machine is saying what it is saying. But there are other classes of model, which we call as interpretable models, where we can understand why the machine is classifying what it is, right? And for different problem spaces which you want to solve, you might want to use a interpretable model versus a deep learning model. Again, the whole idea of this slide is that AI is a very, very broad field, and there's a lot to learn there rather than just concentrating on deep learning. Within machine learning, there are some concepts which have stayed the same universally. You need to know probability and statistics, which will always go if you're doing machine learning. Fairness has become a very big issue. And I don't know how many of you attended Nishit's talk yesterday, but quickly, this is so important that I need to spend a minute on this, that what we find out is that a lot of machine learning algorithms are biased. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that, let's say there's a, I don't know how many of you have seen the booth outside where we are doing smile prediction. So, you know, how many have done the smile prediction booth outside? Right, great. So, you know, you smile and the machine detects that you are smiling and it can tell you the intensity of your smile. Now, what scientists have found out is that if I run the same machine learning algorithm on a white person versus a black person, the black person will be consistently underrated for the same smile. Right? So these algorithms, and it could be for various reasons, maybe due to the color of the face, they could not detect the lip curl, the curl of the lip, which is the feature it's using for smile, right? So fairness has become a very big issue today in using artificial intelligence algorithms. Think about a machine which is making decisions on you, and it's biased, right? And maybe if you're an old person, it gives you a low score because it was trained on all young people. Right? So these are some things which are on the cutting edge of machine learning and AI, which we want to solve with. So let's become a little interactive again, and I know I won't be able to cover all the slides, but I want that interaction. I think that's important. So what do you want to apply AI to? So if you can get the mics to the audience. You know, you all have come here to, you know, the title of my talk is Solving Problems Using AI. So what problems do you guys want to solve with AI? So please raise your hands and give me some innovative ideas. Let's say you've learned AI, you know, or you're learning AI, but what is the problem? What are you excited about solving with AI? Hands? So let's have a different person this time. Okay, I see a person there. We'll come to you as well, but if we can get the mic to that gentleman here. Amit, can you keep me on time, please?
Yeah, hi. We are currently working on a project which is related to dedicated freight corridors. So what we are doing using AI, we are trying to understand the logistic movement for each containers which enters into the country, and it moves around the dedicated freight corridor across the country and goes back from the port and to the onward destination. So here we are, as of now, collecting the data.
Yep. Very good.
We have been collecting this data for the past 2 years. We have expanded from JNPT port to now almost all the ports in the country. So after collecting all these data, we will try to understand the logistic movement, because on an average, it takes 4.5 days across the globe for a container to move across and go out. But in a country like ours, it takes between 14 days to 45 days.
Okay.
So it adds to logistic cost. And then if it's a perishable product, you can understand the condition. So these are things that at the government level, Government of India is working on, along with Japanese government, try to understand the logistic movement, how we can optimize it, how we can bring down the overall cost. Because if we see the cost, I'll give you another example. The cost of orange from Nagpur is not high as the logistic cost from Nagpur to Mumbai or Pune. So these are things which will help us optimize and over a period of time control inflation, and will have a much more bigger impact at the overall economy level.
Sure. No, very good example. So he's applying it to logistics and, you know, and optimization. There's a lady here. If we can get the mic to her.
Yeah, I'm Pallavi and I'm working in machine learning. So I think in AI, if generally you ask me where the application is,
I want to know what you want to apply to it, or what you are applying to.
Where it should be applied to get maximum results, I think it should be medicine. Because especially in a country like India and the kind of changes that we have seen in lifestyle in like 40 years, we would like to understand how, what diseases people can get depending on their probably health parameters or genome mapping or their food lifestyle, and the predictive analytics to what should be done. Of course, leading a healthy lifestyle is definitely the thing.
The main goal.
But that could be the one thing that could be
Sure.
good.
Let's have one more suggestion from there and continue.
I think in India we need to apply AI in basic thing like learning. Means specialized learning for specialized group of people. So even in schools, what we are teaching right now, we are not teaching in the way it should be. Basically, it should be, we should taught or we should be teaching children to learn, how to learn, and that is missing. And for that, I think we need to understand what kind of person or a child that is, and accordingly, we should suggest the how to personalize the training
education.
and all.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
No, good.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Now, three very interesting examples. So, logistics, healthcare, and learning. So, this is what we should be applying AI to. But what are our students mostly applying AI to, right? And this is because we are a company which helps companies in recruiting, and we recruit ourselves for. So, when I used to look at resumes in 2000, the project which we used to see everywhere is library management system. So everyone used to build a library management system using coding, right? Now what has happened after 20 years, is that when you see a resume, you find this, handwriting recognition. How many of you have built a handwriting recognition system using AI? 2, 3, no one else? Please don't build a handwriting recognition system using AI, right? So the problem is that handwriting recognition is a problem where we already have the data sets, and people just apply a machine learning algorithm and build an algorithm. And what we really look for from students is that they apply AI to new problems. I mean, that's the second lesson of this whole talk. There are only 2 lessons in this talk, and I've already given them. Now I'll just show you some examples. The first lesson is that be broad in AI and don't only run after deep learning. And the second example is that where you can really be innovative is what problem you solve using machine learning and AI. A lot of AI algorithms have become commoditized. You can pick them up from the web and apply them. Where your creativity lies is, can you find out a new problem to solve which impacts you, which impacts the society around you, and which through AI where you can create value, right? And that's what I will lean all of you to think. A good project, we keep talking about what's a good AI project. A good AI project is, not picking up a data set from the web, which is already out there, and trying a new technique on it. A good machine learning project is where you think of a new idea where you can apply machine learning, collect that data, and then build something which is useful, which no one has done before, right? And there's so many ideas. I see they're playing football at the back of it, and there could be ideas around automatically umpiring football, where probably if you sit in your college and you can collect that data by putting a camera near the goal and doing some prediction based on it. But you need to, so again, it's another way of saying don't be narrow to the technique. It's just a technique, right? So it's a key where you can put your creativity is what hole do you want to open with that key, right? And that's where all of our creativity should go today, because we have this one new technique which works very, very well, but there are a number of other techniques. So those are the 2 lessons of this presentation, and as much as time will permit, we'll see some examples of this. So in my company, one problem which we solved using machine learning was grading programs, right? And what is the problem we are trying to solve? We are trying to say that, can a machine tell what is the quality of a program a student has written, right? So if I tell a student to, let's say, write a program to print a pattern, can the machine tell how good that program is? And people who are here from computer science will think that, oh, but we can just run test cases on it, and we can see if they pass all the test cases. But the problem is that there's much more to a program than passing test cases. One, a lot of codes don't pass test cases, but the logic of the program is correct, right? So you might make one silly error and it doesn't pass test cases, but the logic of the program is correct. And if you had a human who was looking at that program, they say, oh, this algorithm is correct, right? And that's what we want the machine to be able to do. And then there are other things about the program, like, like if you have a copy which says the right, you have been asked to write a paragraph, and you write a paragraph and say, oh, it's a good paragraph, but is it neat and clean? Does it follow the rules? So there's certain things like similarly for programs, that does it have readability? Are the variables named properly, and so on? And you would want the machine to do it. And then there's other things around code efficiency. A lot of you might have tried websites on the web which take forever to open. That's because the efficiency of the code is poor. It just takes all the time. So you want to be able to automatically find all these parameters, and this is how we have defined the product, that, oh, we want the machine to be able to detect these 3 things. So we have not even gotten to AI as yet. We have not even gotten to deep learning as yet. We're still deriving a real world question of grading programs into a product, right? And that's where the industry spends most of its time to define what they want in the product, right? And that's where you should define your time when you're thinking about solving a problem with AI, that what do you want to really solve, right? From saying grading programs to defining what you will grade on is a big distance to cover, and that's where most of the people fail. Just skip this slide. But so this is the two lessons, which I'm just repeating myself, but defining the problem statement is really, really important. Asking the scientific question from that problem statement is really, really important, right? And how many of you have heard about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or read it? Okay, good. So still people read it, but there's this very interesting thing there, that there's this whole computer which works for billions of years and finds the answer to the world, universe, and everything, and the answer is 42. Right? The answer, what the machine comes out is the answer is 42. And then they say, but what's the question? Right? And the machine says it will take billions of more years to come to finding out what's the question. So that's the importance of asking questions. So deep learning is 42. AI is 42. Right? It's the answer. But you have to ask the question on what you want to solve using AI, right? And that's what is important, right? And if you're students, you have to think of useful applications. If you're industry, you have to think of useful products. And if you are here in research, if there's some research students here, you have to frame broad questions in the language of science. And one may again think that this is something obvious. We all can ask a question, but I'll give you one small example to say what I'm trying to say here. A question could be, there's a question which scientists have been interested for very, very long. And the question is, what is consciousness? Right? It's a very easy question to ask. What is consciousness? But it's very, very hard to put it in scientific language, because anything which you have to put in scientific language, there has to be a way through evidence that you can come to the answer. What is the problem with consciousness? That today I know that I am conscious, but I don't know if any of you here are conscious or not, or just making me believe you are conscious. And I don't know how you know that I am conscious, right? So it's an ill-stated problem. It's a completely subjective problem. We all probably know that we are conscious because we believe we are. But how do we know anyone else is conscious? And how do you experimentally say something is conscious or not? And then there are scientists like Christoph Koch, who have done a lot of work in the last 20 years to be able to scientifically define this question and say that what are the evidences around consciousness and being able to measure consciousness, right? So translating a real world question into a scientific question is a process where you have to get it into that periphery of being able to link it with evidence, right? And there's a famous scientist in India who's out of Pune, Mashelkar, R.A. Mashelkar. How many of you heard of R.A. Mashelkar? A lot of people, right? And he says this famous statement that there are only two people who are remembered in science. One who asks the question and one who gives the final answer. You know, everyone in between is forgotten. So, ask questions and ask good questions. And those questions could be products, those questions could be services, or those questions could be about life and universe and everything about that, right? And in this product, we have also asked a question, which is, can we grade programs like humans do automatically using machine learning? And we realized that the answer is yes. To a good degree of accuracy, you can. Quickly moving ahead, this is, and the gentleman there who was talking about logistics talked about this, right? So the first step in machine learning is data collection. So all the way all deep learning, machine learning today works is through data collection, and is to have samples which are rated by humans, and then the machine mimics that process. And then there's a very important step which is called labeling, right? It can't be emphasized less. There's so much, confusion about people who say, oh, the government databases have so much data. If we just put that data into AI, everything will get solved in the world, right? But what we need on any data is a human label for machines to be able to understand it. So when we talked about a machine saying that this image is a dog or not, we need first tens of thousands of images of dogs and not dogs which are labeled by a human saying which one is a dog or not, and then the machine mimics that. And labeling is like one of the most expensive jobs out there. We take generally 12 to 18 months to build a machine learning based product. We spend 9 to 12 months to get the data and label it accurately, right? And that's why I said that if you really want to experience AI, don't do the digit recognition project, because the data has been already created. So if you want to really know how machine learning and AI works and how you can use it, you need to go through this process, and there are thousands, not thousands, there are tens of techniques in machine learning which can work on a data set of size 400 to 500. So there's another misnomer in the community in students that you need tens of thousands of points to run an experiment. That's not true. You know, till deep learning came, most of the algorithms saturated after 1,000 points and kept giving us the same results anyway, right? So I would more like a project where you use your creativity to define a problem, you know, collect 500 points and build a model on it. Oops, this doesn't work. Can you see if the, no? Okay, I'll continue talking while they try to, okay, let's see if I can make it work. Okay, so the battery is low on this laptop, so the presentation might switch off any minute. We try to keep going. Okay, it works from here. Okay, so anyway, very quickly, then you use a machine learning algorithm, but when we do this programming work, we use another technique which is known in computer science, which is called program analysis, where we use our knowledge of compilers and how compilers parse a program. And finally, you get a model. Again, you spend so much time, if you are in the industry, on making sure that the model really works in the real world. And that's where you need to know statistics. So a lot of people today use machine learning in their work. They build a model, but they really don't know how to evaluate that model and say whether it will really work in the real world. And that is like one thing which we really need to know. Right? So again, for people who are here interested in learning AI and machine learning, please do a basic statistics and probability course. Otherwise, you'll be running a machine learning algorithm, developing a model, and giving it to someone, but it will not work. Right? And a lot of such models are floating around here. Right? And this goes back to my earlier point that don't just go for the techniques. There are some concepts in machine learning which are universal, which have been going for the last 30 years in statistics. Is one of them. So that's the same thing. Most problems are multidisciplinary. In another project, we use speech together with the AI. We use programs. We use images, and you need to learn all of these things. Not all of these things, but just don't do. You know, we get after a fad and just do one thing. So let's take another example, and again we can. Have a mic going around because we can do co-develop a product out here. Can we have a mic for the audience? So another problem we were interested in is that if students write emails and we want to see how good are their email writing skills, how would we evaluate it? So the question to the audience is that how would you evaluate an email? If you're trying to define an application here, but the broader question is that I want to evaluate the quality of an email written by a student to know what are his or her email writing skills. So what will you really evaluate in that email? So you must be getting emails which you don't like, right? And say, oh, this is really a bad email. So what are those features in an email? So there's a lady out here who wants to say something.
I would be looking for the spelling
Errors.
Then the format in which it is presented.
What do you mean by the format?
Format in the sense ki, first of all the addressing to whoever.
Very good.
And then starting with a brief introduction
to
who you are and what you are asking
Excellent.
about.
Yep.
And then going for ki, what is your query about, and then thanking the person and regards or some salutary notation at the end, followed by the person's name and contact details. And most importantly, it should not be like a WhatsApp message. It should have complete words, not short forms.
Excellent. So you said how you address the person, the format, how the mail flows, the sign off, and you also talked about good word, certain kinds of words being there. Any other thoughts? There's this gentleman here, and then one at the corner.
So this is seen in a lot of business mails. PFA, please find.
PFA, okay.
Yeah.
So you don't want that word PFA.
No short forms.
No short forms. Excellent. Okay. And there was,
hi.
yeah.
Maybe we can identify sentiments.
Identify sentiments. Okay. What sentiment you want and what you don't want.
Maybe the person that in the mail is, maybe I'm sending the mail to someone and maybe it is not a desired person that actually I'm sending. So maybe kind of that we receive a spam mails like,
Sure.
do you
See,
won a lottery and all.
No, good
so-
suggestion. But remember, you are again moving from the key to the lock. You know, we can do sentiment analysis, and you're saying how to fit it to this problem. Do it the other way,
Okay.
right? Think about what is needed in a good email, and do you want to do sentiment analysis with it, right? Because this is another one thing which has been done. You take a comment there, and then another one here, and yeah, go ahead.
Email should be concise and to the point, because
Concise and to the point.
say you are sending an email to an HR of a company, they don't want to read an essay. They only want to know what's brief and what do you want to say in a less amount of words.
Right.
So it should be concise.
Excellent, ma'am.
I think it should have the summary as well as the details separated out properly.
Summary and details.
Because a lot
separate.
of senior management people spend a lot of time looking at what do I need to look at in this email.
Absolutely.
So
Excellent.
they just need 2 lines on top and the details they may not get into.
Excellent. So we've just, collectively been defining this product out here. Now, the real question is, which we all should think, is that how do we solve with AI, right? So this is the first step which we all need to take, and AI comes after that, right? And some of these can be solved using AI, and some of these may not be solvable by what we have in current AI, and that's why it is an interesting problem, and you can make a research project around it, right? So we went for the same problem, and if you see, we, it's similar to what some of the people said here. Oops, sorry. Okay, let's just. Okay. So yeah, we said though there's different parts of the emails, what can be the kind of errors in the different parts of the email. I'll give you a chance to speak in a minute, yeah. And how can we detect, so a lot of work went on saying that, what are email etiquettes, right? And that's what we defined it. How do you open an email, how do you close an email, and it can change by cultures, right? It might be different in India, it might be different in USA, it might be different in China, right? And we used an approach where we got people from multiple countries to agree on certain minimum rules which they would like to see in an email. And that became what we started calling the email etiquettes, which you see on the left-hand corner, that there are these rules which we try to look in an email, which makes it a good email, while we, of course, also want to look that the content is relevant to the subject, and then we want to look at grammar, right? And continuing the example, these are again, so finally it was these all different errors, these all different error categories, that they can be missing things, they can be redundancy, they can be word usage issues, they can be emotional punctuation. Some people will say, I'm very, very, very unhappy, right? And you are very, very, very unhappy with that email when you get it, right? So we made all these things, and then we didn't solve everything using machine learning. We found that email etiquettes, it's the rule-based systems and expert systems which are better to do that, right? So you don't need to be a one-trick pony where say, we're just wanting to use machine learning and you're not. The idea should be to be able to solve a problem and get the techniques which would help you solve that problem, right? So, and this is how the report which comes out of the tool looks like, right? So it's telling you about the number of email etiquette errors, the number of spelling errors, so on and so forth. Then it says what kind of email etiquettes did the person not follow. What kind of grammatical errors he or she made, what kind of typographical. So this is one example of building an AI system which uses both machine learning and uses rule-based or expert systems. And so again, coming back to the principles, understand AI broadly, don't just go after ML or DL, and think about outputs. This is in fact the last message, and then we'll take this comment here from the gentleman and any other questions. But let me just, so there's another thing which we do, which is video interviews. Where people ask, where rather than people asking you questions in an interview, your computer asks you questions, and you're replying with your webcam on, right? And then using machine learning and AI, we can automatically say that how much positive emotion you showed, what kind of engagement did you show, did you do eye contact or not, did you smile or not, and so on and so forth, and try to automate some of the interviewing process, right? So what is happening is that the traditional process was that a human will interview you. The new process is not necessarily that a machine is interviewing you. The new process is that the machine and the human are co-interviewing you, right? So there are some things which the machine does well, and there are some things which humans do well. And they work together to get the best outcome. But what that really does is this. you know. So this is the new world in which we live, where there's a user, right? So let's take a different example which might explain this. So let's take the example of a call center where you're calling someone, where you're chatting with a chat agent who's helping you with your credit card which you have lost, right? So traditional process is that you are a user and there's a human agent, and you're chatting with this human agent who's helping you with your credit card lost. What we would probably, AI experts would want, 10 years hence, is that you're not talking to a human agent, but you are talking to a machine, and he or she is helping you. I mean, it is helping you, solve your problem. But this is the situation where we are today in, because machines can't do everything. There's a machine and a human who are together helping you to solve your credit card problem. So for some of these simple questions which you have, the machine will answer them. And if it can't answer them, the human will answer them. But this creates two new interfaces. One, how does the machine, talk to the user? And then how does the machine even talk to this other person who's helping you? What kind of information does this machine give to this person to help you best solve your credit card problem? And this goes into the field of what we call as human-computer interaction. Some others might call it design thinking. But when you're using AI to give out outcomes to people, what you need to think a lot about is how do you present that information for that information to be useful, right? And we are in a new world where we have to see machine as a third agent which is with us, and that agent has to communicate with all of us. So when you're thinking about AI and AI algorithms, you have to think about how they will communicate, how will you make them communicate with humans, and what will be the language, and so on and so forth. I'll pause there. I know there's a comment from Sir here. If someone can get him the mic and maybe take a couple of more questions, because we just have 2 minutes left.
Hello. No, basically what I was trying to say is that, yeah, you can use all this AI and machine learning for, defining emails and what is the syntax, etc. I think the important question is, today we live in a world where how many people really look at the emails, and the first question to ask is that email required? Okay?
Or is the email being written by a bot as well?
So the thing is, you could be sitting in the next cabin and you send that guy an email. He'll be most offended rather than looking at the structure and whether it meets the objective. And the same thing even for digital messaging.
Sure. No, that's a much more important problem which AI can't solve.
Yeah, so I think you should ask the important question that do you really need the email?
Absolutely. No, and that's what I'm saying, right? So probably you have some questions which you think are important, right? And that's where we should dwell in and use the scientific process to solve. Do we have any more questions from the back? We're at the end of the talk, so, is there any more questions?
Just wanted to check on speech analysis in the similar context. I think Nexidia is one of them from NICE company, which is working on this kind of interfaces to understand the speech from the person who is calling and giving the agent,
the person who's to service.
Agent who's serving, giving the sentiments of the caller and giving the insights how to go about in
doing the job. No, that's absolutely right, and that's what I was saying, that the machine can give you so many different analytics. It can give you the emotion, it can give you the history of the customer, it can give you a number of things. So how do you present that information in a good way to the agent that he or she best responds to the customer? And that's a very interesting problem in itself. Any last questions from that side? Let's go back. You need to run and give it to that gentleman there at the back. And that would be the last question, I guess.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Sir, we've just said about deep learning, how we train a model with huge data that is being provided by us. What if we had a problem that we don't have enough data about, a completely new problem? But how would AI then tackle that if we never had enough data for that?
So there are a couple of ways to tackle that. One, within deep learning now, for a lot of areas, they are pre-trained models, right? So rather than training a model from scratch, if you are solving a vision problem, and you might be solving a new vision problem, but even if you are solving a new vision problem, you can use a pre-trained model of an older problem and just add one layer. This is getting a little technical, but the question is technical. And you can add one more layer at the front of it and then train it. And then if you have less data, that's what I would do. I will try to look for a pre-trained model of some sort in the same field. If I'm doing speech, I like to look for a pre-trained model in speech. If I'm doing vision, I'd like to look for a pre-trained model in vision, and so on and so forth. That's one thing which you could do. The second you could do is that use techniques which don't need a lot of data. So if you're not using deep learning and you're using SVMs, probably you can do with lesser data. And I would, if I were you and I was a problem solver, I say, oh, it's very expensive for me to get 10,000 points. So let me get 500 points and maybe SVM can solve it. So why am I gonna go for 10,000 points and use deep learning? I would just solve it with an SVM. But if I create 1,000 points and I apply an SVM and it doesn't work, then I have no choice then either using a pre-trained model or creating that huge data set which is required. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.